I'm Becca, and this is Deadly Truths, where history, horror, and humanity collide. Every episode, we go beyond the headlines into the hidden corners of American violence. The soldiers, the murderers, the martyrs, and the ghosts that history tried to forget. Some of these stories are old, some are still unfolding, but they all ask the same question: what drives ordinary people to cross the line between duty and destruction? This is Deadly Truths. When Congress passed the Volstead Act in 1919, the word prohibition sounded righteous. It was sold as a cure for moral decay, a way to save families and strengthen the nation after the bloodshed of the First World War. No more whiskey, no more gin, no more sin. But by 1920, the ink was barely dry before Americans learned a bitter truth. You can outlaw liquor, but you can't outlaw desperation. And nowhere did that last lesson echo louder than behind the stone walls of Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, where the hangman's rope grew busier than ever. In those first dry years, the Midwest was ground zero. Kansas was bone dry long before the rest of the country. The state had banned alcohol since the 1880s, and by the time the Volstead Act came along, the border between Kansas and Missouri was already a smuggler's dream. Railroads and dirt roads both led to Leavenworth. To the north, Chicago's bootlegging syndicates; to the east, Kansas City crawling with mob runners and corrupt cops. To the south, the dusty routes where small-town moonshiners dodged on horseback. The federal penitentiary, a gray citadel above the Missouri River, stood as the final stop for men who thought they could outsmart the new moral order. By 1921, federal agents were overwhelmed. The newly formed Bureau of Prohibition had fewer than 2,500 agents for the entire nation. Many were underpaid, undertrained, and tempted by bribes. Each arrest, each shootout added fuel to a system already cracking under hypocrisy. And when violence followed, as it often did, Leavenworth took the bodies. The first wave of Prohibition inmates arrived quietly: moonshiners, rum runners, counterfeiters. They weren't killers, they were farmers with stills and drifters with a taste for quick cash. By the mid-1920s, the tone changed. A gang money grew, so did the guns. Prohibition agents, once mocked as dry crusaders, were now being shot in alleys and on highways. For those convicted of killing a federal official, the sentence was death, and Leavenworth's gallows were ready. One of the first to hang during the Prohibition years was Thomas Slim Madsen, a Kansas City bootleg driver caught in an ambush gone wrong in 1923. He was not a mastermind, just a driver hauling whiskey in a Model T truck with hidden compartments. When federal agents cornered him outside Atchison, Kansas, gunfire erupted. An agent was killed. At trial, Madsen claimed he never fired a shot, that he was caught in the crossfire between rival runners. But federal courts were eager to make an example. He was hung inside Leavenworth's prison yard that summer, the rope's first drop of the Prohibition decade. In local papers, the story barely made the second page. Bootleg violence had become background noise. The machine of justice moved faster than the truth. Federal courts were expanding rapidly, and the definition of federal crime stretched within them. Before Prohibition, the federal government rarely executed anyone. Capital punishment was left to the states. But once alcohol became illegal nationwide, Washington had a new stake in life and death. Leavenworth, already the main penitentiary for federal offenders, became the government's killing ground. By 1926, the hangings were routine enough that they rarely made national news. Among the condemned was John W. Terrell, a Mississippi-born drifter convicted of murdering a Prohibition agent in Oklahoma. Terrell had been a tenant farmer, broke and bitter after years of drought. When a neighbor offered him $20 a run to drive moonshine, he took it. One night on a back road near Tulsa, Oklahoma, agents closed in. A pistol went off. Terrell swore he never meant to kill. He told the warden at Leavenworth that he fired in panic. But in the eyes of the new federal order, Intent did not matter. Killing a federal agent meant one thing. On the morning of his execution, he asked only for a cigarette. His last words were, "Tell my wife I wasn't the devil they said I was." That's the part the law didn't like to discuss. How many of these men weren't monsters. They were only casualties of a government experiment in moral control. When the Volstead Act turned liquor into contraband, it also turned ordinary men into felons overnight. Desperation, poverty, and bad luck became federal crimes, and in Leavenworth those men watched their cellmates die under the banner of justice. By the late 1920s, the prison gallows had a reputation. A black-painted wooden structure stood in a rear courtyard hidden from most inmates. The warden himself often acted as the executioner. Each hanging was carried out at dawn. Witnesses included a U.S. Marshal, a prison chaplain, and sometimes a handful of reporters. The condemned men would be led by 13 wooden steps. Their hands were cuffed, a black hood drawn over their head. The noose was slipped tight. The trapdoor gave way. The sound echoed off the limestone walls. Guards said the birds didn't sing for hours afterwards. One of the most controversial executions of the Prohibition era was Martin Berg, a Norwegian immigrant hanged in 1929 for murdering a federal guard. Berg had been serving a 5-year sentence for bootlegging out of Omaha, Nebraska. By all accounts, he was quiet, hardworking, until the day he snapped. A guard had allegedly beaten him for smuggling tobacco into the yard. Witnesses later claimed Berg fought back in self-defense. The altercation turned deadly. The federal government called it premeditated murder. However, prisoners called it retaliation. When the stock market crashed that same year, America's appetite for moral enforcement began to crumble. The prisons overflowed, the headlines turned from bootleggers to bankers, and the public started to wonder, if the government couldn't keep Wall Street honest, why had it spent a decade killing men over whiskey? By 1931, President Hoover's administration quietly scaled back those executions. A handful of condemned men were granted stays, not out of mercy, but out of fatigue. The federal government was broke. The final hangings tied to the Prohibition years came in early 1933, same year Congress repealed the Volstead Act. Among them was James Albridge, a black man from Louisiana convicted of killing a Prohibition agent during a raid near Shreveport. He insisted his guilt came from being in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was hanged on February 24, 1933, 9 months before the 21st Amendment ended Prohibition for good. Aldridge's death closed a grim chapter in federal justice. The law that had made him a criminal no longer existed by the end of the same year. In total, nearly 36 men were executed at Leavenworth between 1920 and 1933, more than any other federal facility of the time. Their crimes ranged from murder to mutiny to bootlegging gone wrong. Most were poor. Many were immigrants. A few were veterans of the Great War who returned home to find no work and no peace. By World War II, America had other evils to confront. The gallows were eventually dismantled. Leavenworth would go on to hold new generations of killers, deserters, and spies. But in those 13 dry years, the rope told a different story, one about the price of turning morality into a law. Looking back, it's easy to see Prohibition as a failed experiment, a moral crusade that made the nation more violent, not less. Yet at the time, men died believing they were enforcing divine justice, and others died believing they were victims of it. That's the haunting symmetry of Leavenworth's Prohibition years. Both the hangman and the condemned thought they were defending what's right. Today, the names Madsen, Terrell, Berg, and Aldridge are footnotes in dusty ledgers at the National Archives. But these stories whisper a warning about certainty, about what happens when justice forgets mercy and policy forgets people. They remind us that the noose is a poor teacher of virtue, and that sometimes the loudest moral crusades end not with salvation but with silence. This season will continue 15 full episodes on the dark corridors of Leavenworth. Murders, mutinies, and military crimes before this chapter finally closes. In the meantime, I'll also be dropping a bonus mini-series called Morally Corrupt, the bank robbers of the 1930s. From Dillinger to Pretty Boy Floyd, Bonnie and Clyde to Mob. We'll explore how the Great Depression turned criminals into icons and justice into a performance. And when Leavenworth ends, Deadly Truce will move south for season 3 to Kentucky. And that's a journey through blood feuds, coal wars, and the ghost of the bluegrass state. So please stay tuned, definitely subscribe, and stay curious, because in America's history, the gallows are never as far behind us as we'd like to think. You've been listening to Deadly Truths with Becca. If you found this story compelling, follow it, rate it, and share it on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcast. It helps keep the forgotten stories alive, and not to mention history too. The research and narration is clearly done by me, can't you tell? Sources for this episode include the National Archives, the Kansas Historical Society, and the Bureau of Prison Records on the executions at Leavenworth during the Prohibition era. And remember, the past is not dead. It is just doing time at Leavenworth.